Okay, welcome to Key Conversations, where we talk about all the things to inspire you to create a sustainable and fulfilling career. And this season, we're talking all about making a record because I'm kind of in it and it's really all I can talk about. And today, I'm super excited to have Michael Elsner here. He is, to me, the licensing guy. If you haven't heard me talk about him, where have you been? A, B, yeah, I thought I was cool. I had like 40 TV placements and he's got like, 2,000 something. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Michael finally created a course on licensing. And if you're on my email list, if you're not, go to inthekey.co/results. You will learn about that because I talk about it all the time. But yeah, give me just so we have some context of you, because I could brag about knowing you for all the days, but give us like the nutshell of why licensing is like your thing, how that's become your thing in the music industry. And then we'll dive into what people can do if they have their eye on licensing for their new record.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, licensing became my path because, I went down the artist route for a long time. I played in bands and made records and released them. And now this is also at a completely different time than we're at right now. Right. So the late 90s, the early mid 2000s, social media and all that stuff really, like, this is like, we're talking like MySpace and pre-MySpace days. Right. So if I was to be in a band now and release a record now, the approach would be completely different than it was back then. But, because you can have a broader reach as an independent artist. But at that time, especially the early 2000s, starting in 2003, 2004, after, pursuing record labels and publishers and all that kind of stuff, doors just started opening. I started getting songs placed on shows. So, I was, trying to kick down doors, trying to get into a publisher and trying to get a publisher to say yes to, signing me to a publishing deal or, get some record labels to pay attention, which is, kind of tough. But the song opportunities, the opportunities to license my songs, it just kept coming. And so, I was in a band in the mid 2000s and I just joke about it, but I'm honest when I say like, it was like my most successful failure in the sense that, at the time we had a focus and a goal, and the goal was to get a record deal. Obviously we didn't get there. We met with a lot of labels. This is around 2007, 2008, which was the worst time. Not only because of the economy, but then the economy was heavily affecting all the labels. And not only was the economy affecting labels, but so was the ramifications of the Napster and social file sharing networks. Like Kazaa and LimeWire and all that in the early 2000s, where people could buy a CD, rip it, put it up on these file sharing networks, and steal tens and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of sales from an artist and a label. So while I was pursuing that, trying to get that ball rolling, we just kept getting song placement after song placement after song placement. So, there came a point where I just looked at it and went, I get to write all these different styles of music for TV, but when we were, pursuing the record label pursuit, I had to write one style of music and 12 songs, and that's all we focused on for a year. And there just came a point where I really enjoyed the flexibility and actually the artistry of having licensing as the outlet, because I could go into my studio and write everything. Like if I wanted to write one day an a cappella track, there'd be a place for it. If I wanted to go in the next day and write a heavy metal track, there'd be a place for it. If I wanted to go in the next day and write a bluegrass track, there would be a place for it. And if you're an artist pursuing a record deal, you really can't have an album full of a cappella, bluegrass, heavy metal, EDM.
I mean, I would buy that album, but
very few people would. Yeah. You're the super fan, which is awesome.
I mean, I am. I really am a super fan. So fast forward to today, and you have a studio, and you basically work. You're not touring, correct?
No.
So much. So you really are producing and composing every day, and you are pitching the licensing, and you have your system in place, and you're not even pitching really. You've got these machines kind of working for you. Is that how that?
Yeah. I mean, I have. In my earlier years, I learned the technical facility of recording. That's actually, I always say, like, I didn't go to music school, because I didn't go to music school to learn how to play the instruments and compose and whatnot. But I did go to a technical school. I did go to learn how to record, recording engineering. So I had that in my back pocket, and then course, as I got out, this is actually, I actually went and learned recording engineering before Pro Tools was even really the standard. In fact, I didn't even learn on Pro Tools. I didn't even know that Pro Tools existed until after I, graduated. So, but the theories are all the same, and as far as how to, microphone theory and, compressors and EQs and whatnot. So it's very easy to translate that from a hardware, piece of gear to software. But, yeah, so that was kind of my background. And then, so I've always been very much in control of the recording process. I feel like recording and engineering and mixing is just as creative as sitting down and writing a chord progression and melodies. And I also feel that, especially nowadays, as an artist, with the technical, well, I should say maybe with the software that we have out there, that is extremely cheap and unbelievably powerful. Anyone can literally make a professional recording on their laptop. With a little bit, it's just like photography. If you take a good photo and you learn Photoshop, you can turn that photo into something unbelievable. And it's the same thing with music. You can take a chord progression and a melody, and with a little bit of the technical facility and learning how to run a program or two on your laptop, you can make it sound like a professional recording. It's astounding what we have now on our laptops compared to what we had 20 years ago that cost an arm and a leg to get into the recording world. Yeah. So I record all my own stuff. I have a studio in my house, in the bonus room in my house, and that's where I write and create and mix and run everything. And then when it comes to actually getting the songs out there, I have a publisher now who handles all the admin for us. Now, we deliver it in a very specific way, and that's a lot of the stuff that I cover, when I'm talking about licensing. But they handle all the admin, and the reason why we have a publisher now handling all the admin is so that, in the middle of the day, we don't have to stop and deal with contracts and negotiations. We can just keep staying in the creative space and let them handle all the administration of the catalog.
Awesome. So that was like a perfect summary. So I want to now sort of focus this conversation in on talking to the artists that have music coming out. So they might have just finished the mix process, whether they're mixing it themselves or they have someone else mixing it, which is totally fine either way. What can they do in terms of moving forward, maybe even getting into the mastering conversation? This is sort of the in-between mixing and mastering conversation. What can they do to really increase and optimize their potential for licensing later when this thing is released, or maybe before the release?
Sure. Well, just for clarity's sake, I don't mix everything that I do. There comes a point sometimes where I like to just stay in the creative world, and I like to just hire out the mixing. So I'm absolutely, I totally understand that perspective of working with an engineer and working with having someone else mix your music for you. And at the same point, sometimes it's great to have another set of ears on it, especially if you've been working your butt off on it and you're fully. It can be very easy to lose sight of things when you're so married to every little note and every single audio file, so sometimes it's good to hand it off to someone else and get a different perspective of the mix, right? But as far as what you do with the final mix, there are two paths, right? And they don't really converge on each other. So for example, if you are releasing a record, okay, and you're going to actually, package this up. If you want to burn it to a CD, that's cool. But you're actually going to create a whole package that you're going to sell to fans, or you're going to have it out as digital downloads, whatever. That is one particular path. So basically, what you would do is you take your full mixes from your mix engineer, or if you're doing them yourself, whatever, your full mixes, and ideally, what you would do is you take it to a mastering house. They would run all those, let's say you're doing a 10-song record. They would order those 10 songs, put them in order on the album, how you want them ordered. They'd create the spaces in between, so you have about a 2 or 3 second space in between. I'm just going to assume that we're using a CD here,
yep.
Right? And then what they're going to do is they're going to master it. And mastering is basically the final stage of recording. This term mastering has been misused a lot, but the mastering is the final stage, and it's where you take the individual songs and you make them sound like one cohesive unit. And a great example of this is I grew up in the tape era. So we would make mixtapes for our friends. This is one of my favorite songs from like this Led Zeppelin record. This is one of my favorite songs from this, Jimi Hendrix album and whatever. And so, when you give your buddy the cassette or someone gives you, if you like a girl and they like you, sometimes you give each other a cassette, right? But then, you put it in your car and you play it. And as you go from song to song, a lot of times you find yourself reaching for the volume knob, right? To adjust the level. Well, that Led Zeppelin song was pretty quiet compared to this, Jimi Hendrix song, or whatever. And what mastering does is mastering eliminates that. Mastering makes it so that all the tracks are of the same level. If there are certain EQ differences, maybe one track is a little more bass heavy and the track before it is a little light on the bass, the mastering engineer will go in and thicken up the bass on the first song and lighten up the bass on the second, just so that there's more consistency in the bass and the overall EQ. So it's more or less overall EQ, overall level adjustment.
Yeah,
it's just like that final little sweetening. Now that's what mastering is. Now, if we step back, to the beginning of mastering, and we go back, a couple of decades, we used to have 45s, which singles, a single in each side. Well, those didn't really need to be mastered, right? And then as the technology grew, and then they were able to make the LPs, you'd have one song recorded in one studio, maybe in the month of May, right? And then that band, finished the second song right beyond that. Maybe some other mix engineer mixed it at a different studio, maybe in June, right? And so ultimately these songs were all recorded and mixed at various different studios. So when you compiled them on an LP, they'd be at different levels and they'd have different, frequencies and stuff like that. So that's how mastering got born. Mastering really came about with the LP so that all 5 songs on one side and all 5 songs on the other would sound cohesive. Now, mastering has been used as a term as basically like, okay, I just finished my mix, now I'm going to master it. But really, that doesn't mean anything unless you're mastering against something before and something after.
Yeah, it doesn't, it could mean like, okay, I'm going to master it for radio so that it becomes the broadcast level or something. But a lot of people think of it as, I'm just going to boost it to be as loud as possible, which is not what you want to do. And it's not the point.
Yeah. So people now look at it like, okay, here's my mix. I'm going to master it. If you have a single song, you can't really theoretically master a single song. Oh yeah, you can. But all you're really doing is you're just adding compression, to really adjust the levels, and you're doing like an overall EQ. That's more like sweetening it. It's not mastering it. That's sweetening that track. Mastering is when you are mastering multiple tracks so that it sounds like a successive, product.
Yeah, a cohesive record. So yeah, totally. That is a really good point to bring up, that mastering is not necessarily just making louder one track. So why mastering? We're going to have another episode where we actually talk with the master engineer, go through his process a little deeper. So let's talk about like setting yourselves up for licensing and why does mastering come into play, and what do we need to master and what do we not need to master? I know I always master my vocals and my instrumentals, but should there be more? Why would there be more?
So that first path that we went down, if you're going to make a record, you're going to release it, you're going to want to get those tracks mastered. Before you put the songs on a CD, you're going to want to get them mastered. But that CD is what you're going to sell and promote to your fans and to your customers. Now, in the licensing world, that's a completely different path. All right, and we have to look at the end users in that path. If an editor or a supervisor pulls a track of yours and they put it into a show, it's going to be surrounded before it and after it by tracks from other composers from other parts of the world who you don't know, right? So really, when it comes to licensing, you don't have to master those tracks. And in fact, I don't master anything that I send out for licensing, and here's why. Because what I do is I send out not only the full mix, but I also give the editors and the supervisors and the re-recording mixers multiple other options. I'll give them the instrumental mix. If I can do various alternate mixes like a stripped down mix or an acoustic mix or even just a drum and bass mix, I burn those as well. And I want all of those mixes to sound cohesive, meaning that if I master the full mix, now I have to master all the other ones. Because let's say that there's a scene where the editor wants to use the acoustic mix and then crossfade it at a certain moment once the actors start, finish their dialogue. He wants to crossfade that acoustic mix into the full mix. Well, if you went from an unmastered acoustic mix to a mastered full mix, there's going to be a massive discrepancy. It's going to sound very weird. It's going to sound like a terrible edit, and it's not, the whole idea with music underneath when you're syncing music to picture is that it's really subliminal. It's enhancing the scene. It's not something that you're really noticing. And that's something that you would notice. You'd notice that immediately. So you're stuck in this position of, well, if I'm going to master the full mix, then you're stuck mastering all of them. And this is why I don't master any of them. But what I do is I run everything. Again, I'm kind of in control of the process myself. So what I do is I run everything through what's known as a mastering plugin. And a mastering plugin really is just something that you put on the mastering fader, on the mastering fader. Yeah, exactly. And it can add a little compression. It can add a little EQ. It can just kind of give an overall touch to the stereo mix. I particularly like a plugin called Ozone. That's the one I've been using for a long time. But I have it always on the master fader. And when I'm done with my full mix and I want to mute, say, the vocal and create the instrumental mix, then I just mute the vocal. I burn that down, and it's still going through the exact same settings that I have on that plugin, right? So that instrumental mix is going to sound exactly like that full mix. And another thing that's nice about Ozone is also has like a little stereo widener that kind of adds a little, depth as well. There are little things, just when you use them just a touch, that adds an incredible amount of, I just call it like some shine. It really shines up that track quite a bit. And then, of course, if I want to, strip that instrumental mix down to like an acoustic mix or a stripped down mix or whatever, I just mute the other instruments that I don't want to use. I burn those down, and it's going to sound cohesive. And the same thing is true when I start burning out my stem mixes. If you're just doing the drum stem and the guitar stem and the bass stem, the vocal stem, the orchestra stem, whatever, I'm running all of those through the exact same settings, I don't touch anything. I run it through that mastering plugin exactly as I have it set up, so that, again, when you take all of those stems and you layer them back together, it's going to sound just like the full mix.
Right.
So in that respect, I don't necessarily master it in the traditional sense, but I do add that extra sweetening to it. And one thing, this is another big difference here with mastering, is that a lot of times, you were talking earlier about the radio mix. Sometimes for a radio mix, people will really kind of compress that full mix, right? You want to get that radio mix pretty tight, so that when people are driving down the road in their car, they can hear all that stuff above the road noise and whatnot, right? So you can compress a full mix pretty heavily when you're mastering it. But one of the reasons why I don't compress my full mix a lot at all when I'm in the licensing world, when I'm doing my mixes for licensing, is because there are going to be a couple people past me along the chain, right? This song is now going to go to a music supervisor who's going to be, in touch with her music editor, his or her music editor. Maybe the music editor might add a little stuff to it. Maybe they'll throw a plugin on it just to kind of, compress it a little bit so it sits under the dialogue or whatever. And then it's going to go to a re-recording mixer. And the re-recording mixer, their job is to take all the music, all the dialogue, all the sound design, all the other noises that you hear in a show or a movie, and mix it together. And ultimately, it's really going to be up to them to essentially master that track, because they're going to be sitting that music in with the dialogue. They're going to be sitting that music in with the tracks that came before it and the tracks that came after it. Mm-hmm. So what I want to do is I don't want to tie their hands at all. I want to give them a lot of freedom. And it's a lot easier to compress something than it is to decompress it. Like think of stepping on a tin can, right? A Coca-Cola can. Mm-hmm. You can step on that Coca-Cola can. It's a lot easier to step on it than it is to take a squashed Coca-Cola can and pull it out, make it look nice.
Yeah. So your whole thing about, you said so many great things in there. I just want to unpack a couple of them. And I can think of one question I know people will have, but the idea of stems or stripes in the ad world is what they call them. But basically it's taking out each element and sending that as one track, so that all those people you mentioned, whether it's the music supervisor, the editor, or the re-recording master, engineer, can have options. And maybe they're like, oh, there's too much, that string line, the violins are taking away from the dialogue. They're sort of sitting in the same place. Let's take those out. Then it's just guitar and bass. So the more options they have, the more likely they're going to use the track, because they don't have to go back and keep getting things and all that stuff. Right.
And yeah, it's basically a stem is a stereo mix of a certain instrument group. So a vocal stem would be just stereo mixes, a stereo mix of just all the vocals, the lead vocal, all the background vocals, just that. An orchestra mix would be orchestra stem would be just the strings and the orchestra in stereo from that full mix. A drum stem would just be a stereo mix of just the drums. So it's really a stereo mix of just the instrument group. And the other reason why re-recording mixers like this is because not only for the options with levels, which is super, super, super important, but also because in music we mix in stereo. But most shows, I would say like 99%, if not even 100 at this point, but for sure, movies and whatnot, trailers and whatnot, they're mixed in 5.1 or 7.1 surround. So, excuse me, when you're handing when a re-recording mixer has the options to place your music within the stereo spectrum and not just be stuck with I'm sorry, I didn't mean the stereo spectrum. I mean to place your music within the surround field and not just be stuck with a 2-track stereo mix.
Right.
That gives them a lot of options to really place the music how they want to. And create the space and the environment that they're trying to create.
That's super cool.
So stems are really important for that reason. It's not just a level thing. It really is more or less for the surround aspect.
Awesome. So one question that I know listeners might have, especially because we're talking about, okay, well, I am making a record and I am getting it mastered for record and I'm not going to be mastering all my stems and everything like that. So that basically, that's something that they can do with their mixes. And that's a conversation they can have with their mix engineer if they're not mixing it, is say, hey, can I get the stems? Which is something you should have anyway, because gosh forbid that mixer moves to the moon and you want your stems a year later. And this happened to me where I wanted to get access to my file. You should have all your sessions. You should have all your stems anyway. But when someone's like, okay, I have this mastered CD, the mastered version of the song is so much better than the pre-master mix. Can I still submit that for consideration and then let the music supervisor or whoever is accepting the music, let them know that I have stems available? Like what's the nomenclature? Don't you want to put your best foot forward? How do you do that?
Well, I actually would say no.
Okay.
That's like, for example, that's like being a drug dealer and giving people the best drugs possible. And then when they come back to buy it, you give them like this watered down crap. Right? I mean, that's kind of what it is,
Your analogies are like top notch today. I'm liking it.
Yeah. I've never done a drug in my life, so I can use that one. But
okay. Me too.
But yeah, no. Mastering will always make something sound better because it's sweetening it.
So don't you want to pitch with that then, or you got to trust the song and go with the pre-mastered mix?
So again, this comes back to then the end users, right? If you're sitting in your car in traffic, you want to listen to the best thing possible. Yeah, you want to listen to that mastered mix because that's what you're listening to. You're just fully focused on that mastered mix. That's why if you're releasing a record, you should go master your music. But when you're sending music in for placement, really what's happening is that they're looking for the feel and the vibe and the pacing of the track. And it has to sound good, for sure. But it's going to sit under dialogue. It's going to sit underneath all the other stuff, right? But then you're forgetting the fact that it's going to go to people who are going to master it and tweak it out and make it sound the way that they want it to sound, because they have to make it sound right with all the stuff before and after it. So it will get there. Mastering is just another step. It's just another step of compressing and EQing, right? Yeah. That's really what it is. And so when you're releasing an album, you are the final step. When you're done with it, you are releasing a final product that when your customers get it, they can't do anything with it. They can only, burn it, but they can't actually go into the tracks and do anything with it. But in the licensing world, there are a couple people further down the line, right, who are very incredibly gifted, unbelievably talented people who do this every day. And so if they get a track that just needs a little sprucing up, they can throw a plugin on it and an EQ on it, and in 2 minutes it can have that touch that it needs. But really what you're really selling more than anything is you're selling the emotion and the feel and the way that song complements the show. You're also selling them the fact that by working with you, they have a lot of options. So for example, maybe the option in that situation is like, man, we really want something, like acoustic sounding and simple and very light. But then at that one moment, we just want it to turn into something huge and powerful. Well, yeah, if you delivered the acoustic mix and the full mix, now the editor has all the options in the world to make that happen. Otherwise, they'd have to search, the globe for a song that starts out a certain way and with acoustic exactly as the director and the producer envisioned it, and that's a lot of times where a composer would come involved, but would be involved. But if you can do that, if you can deliver enough options with your music, I mean, the mastering thing to me is it's not even something. I don't even give it a second thought, to be honest with you. I think people make a bigger deal out of it than it needs to be.
Awesome.
If your track sounds good and your mixes sound good, awesome. It's going to sound even better when it's mastered. But if they don't know what that final version is, I can take a mix that I did right now and it'll sound good, right? I'm very confident in my ability to mix. But then I could go take it to my buddy who could master it, and I go, oh my gosh, it sounds amazing. Of course it will. He's going to make it sound even better. But you know what I started with sounded great. You know?
And is licensable. And this has been super illuminating. I think this is really great. That's like, oh, mastering is the end final step for when we're not doing anything else. So yeah, this is really awesome. And I think this will give people lots to think about and conversation to have with their master engineer in terms of what files are you walking away with that you can use in the future when you really go down the pitching and licensing road, which we could go down that road right now if we wanted to talk for another 3 hours. But tell us where we can find you on the web, Michael Elsner.
Oh, well, you can find me at michaelelsner.com, or you can learn more about the licensing stuff at mastermusiclicensing.com.
Mastermusiclicensing.com. And any social media sites that you like to hang out on? If people, not really.
I'll be honest with you. Social media doesn't play a huge role in my world.
It doesn't. I got that.
It just doesn't. And I mean, I do have obviously the Facebook and the Instagram, but if you go and you look at those, they're I'm not really active on them at all. Again, because. And again, this is a great example of the difference between the licensing world and the traditional music path. In the traditional music path, you're out there trying to bring in fans and expand your brand and connect with people. But in the licensing world, you're literally just you're serving a very small pocket of people: producers, directors, music supervisors, music editors, re-recording mixers. And during the day when they're in their studio doing their work, they're not really searching the web, So I have a whole other way to deliver music to them and connect with them. And if anything, the platform that I use really for my business and to connect with people and stay in contact with people in the business is LinkedIn. So I'm not really posting a lot on social media, but you can always go and see what photos I posted. Lots of puppy photos.
MichaelElsner.com and music
Mastermusiclicensing.com.
Master Music Licensing. Well, thank you so much. We covered a lot, and you have so many more millions of things to share, which is really cool thing about you. You figured it out. I have a lot of respect for people that have figured out one thing like so well that it just blows all the other things out of the water. And you're one of those people in licensing. So
cool. The thing is with licensing is it's you can overthink it to where you don't take any action. And I see that a lot. And mastering is a topic that comes up all the time, and it's just one thing that doesn't require, if you're just walking down the licensing route, don't overthink this one at all.
That I was just going to ask you, are any last thoughts around this whole, creating a record and making sure that you're setting yourself up for licensing down the road? Any other that feels like the answer to that, but are there any other last thoughts around that?
Yeah. If you're creating the record, you're going to get your mixes and all that stuff from your mastering, from your mixing engineer, right?
Yep.
So when you're doing your record, he's going to give you the full mix. He'll probably give you an instrumental mix, and sometimes people ask for what they call a TV track, which is rather useless in the licensing world. But if the TV track is basically just a full mix, but without the lead vocal, but with the background vocal. So if you have to go do a TV show, you can sing along to your recording without hiring a bunch of background vocalists. That's a TV track. But beyond that, I would sit with your mix engineer and I would make sure he burns out the stems. That's very simple. It'll take 10 minutes, 15 minutes to do that. And then as many other alternate mixes that your song really can. I've figured out that there are 22 alternate mixes that you can create. But that doesn't mean that every song can do it. Most songs can do 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. You could probably usually, aside from the full mix, you can usually assume that you're going to have, 4 to 5 total mixes before you even get into like your stems and whatnot. But I would make sure that you get those from your mix engineer. Yeah. Now, once you have them from your mix engineer, now you have it. Now they're already ready to go for licensing. But then if you're going to go do your actual record and release a record, just take the full mixes and go to a mastering engineer and have them master the full mixes. And you just use those for the CDs that you're sending out.
There you go. Done and done. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy and doing all the things, but I really appreciate it.
Cheryl.
And I'll talk to you soon.
I will talk to you later.